Delegates, it's a pleasure to be back here at the convention. And can I tell you, as someone who's seen this union in bad times and in good, whilst the fight ahead of us is very hard, I have never seen the union looking as good as it is today. I've never seen this convention so strong, so active and so united. You should all be terribly proud of what you're doing for your members. Congratulations. I want to acknowledge today the loss of two workers in Victoria, Katie Peters and Stephen Cater. Some of you will be aware that Katie and Stephen were fighting the Harrietville Alpine North bushfire in Victoria last Wednesday when a tree fell on their emergency vehicle, killing them both. I understand that Katie was just 19. She had hopes to be a vet. Stephen was 29. He loved the high country. But also, Stephen was an AW delegate. These two people worked for the Victorian Department of Sustainability and Environment as firefighters. They were doing their jobs, demanding jobs, clearly dangerous jobs. They were protecting their community, and they have paid for their work and their courage with their lives. As all of you know who've ever been in a workplace marked by a fatality or severe injury, nothing is ever the same. And I, like the union, extend my condolences to their families. But what I also know, and this is the story which never gets written, and it isn't done to be written, but it deserves to be written, is that every day and every night, all of you do the work that those Victorian branch organisers did in the hours and days after this tragic loss. Visiting the families, trying to help fill a hole which can never be filled, making sure that the workmates are supported, helping investigate how such things can be avoided in the future. Every day you do this difficult, this stressful, this emotional task of standing up for other people. It isn't the work which sells the newspapers, but I tell you what, it's the work which makes me proud to be an AW member. That's what you do every day. That's why I'm here, to pay you respect, because you stand up for people. In fact, whilst I acknowledge that you finally got around to presenting Bill Ludwig with his life membership, which in itself will be the hardest 50 years of life membership anyone's ever going to earn, and well deserved, what it reminds me of is that this union is bigger than any individual and the work we do, and unionism is bigger than any individual. I am very proud to carry in the Parliament of Australia every day my union membership card. You give me immense pride. I am what I am because of you. There wouldn't be a day goes past where I don't apply my union organising experiences in all manners of representation in the Parliament, be it issues to do with people with disability, be it superannuation. I am, and indeed the Labor Party is, what it is when it's at its best, when we remember where we come from and we remember what gets us up in the morning every day and drives us every day till we finish work every evening. It's the Labor movement values which make, I believe, the Labor Party the preeminent political force in Australia. Now, I respect your leadership. Frankly, I'm blown away by how Paul Howes and Bill Ludwig have taken this union from strength to strength in recent years. It's a remarkable accomplishment. Your whole national organisation, the state branches, all deserve recognition. You do good things, and you've got to keep believing in yourselves and the good things you do. I am happy to hold up my union card because I know there will be some anonymous editorial writers in some of the right-wing media who will say how terrible it is that a minister would hold up his union card. Well, you know what? I am pro-union. I am not embarrassed to use the word union. Unions have contributed much more good in this country than any other institution in Australian democracy, outside of the Parliament of Australia. So I say again, and I declare, I am pro-union. But before the editorial writers and some of the vested interests on the right write to say, well, this is bad, let me also say to you, whether or not these words will get the same coverage, I don't know, but I'm pro-jobs, and I'm pro-employers, and I'm pro-businesses, and I'm pro-families, and I don't care what shape or form a family comes in. I don't even care who you want to marry. But the reason why I say what I'm for is because Australian unionism across its history and the history of this union is a good history. And it's a good present and it will be a good future. See, I know that when the critics say unionism's had its day, that in fact there's no more work for unions to do, you go tell it to people who die at work. You tell it to the families of those victims. You tell it to people who are getting underpaid. You tell it to people who require their penalty rates to make ends meet. If you want to say that unionism has no future, you tell it to the people who have an insufficient amount saved for their retirement when it's unions fighting for better retirement incomes. See, I know, I understand and I believe that what AW delegates and members and officials and the leadership do every day is they would seek cooperation in the workplace. They would dismiss and eschew and reject disharmony and conflict. All our members want is to be paid fairly, to be paid reasonably so they can get ahead, so they can pay their housing mortgages, so they can educate their kids, so they can have a holiday, so they can retire on something approaching a reasonable form of dignity. I know the modern Australian unionists seek cooperation. I know that you, every day, work with employers. I know there's many employers out there who seek cooperation with you. And I know that there's many employers out there who are generating the value and profit which employs our members. I think it is logical and reasonable and sensible that Australian workers, in combination with Australian employees, create the national wealth of this country, and it is entirely appropriate that unions would seek the fair distribution of national income being the fruits of the work of Australian workers. How can this picture of the economy and society be out of date? When did cooperation go out of date? When did the rejection of exploitation go out of date? In fact, it has never gone out of date. And the fact is that what you do every day is you make sure that there's a little more equity in the workplace than there otherwise would be if you weren't there. I don't believe that what you do in the workplace is bad. I think it is good. What worries me is when you're not present in the workplace. I just want to make sure then who speaks for those people? How to avoid these people being unfairly dismissed, made redundant without their appropriate conditions, not working in safe environments. Our movement and your organisation and the organisation I'm a life member of, we are as relevant as we were 127 years ago, and will still be relevant long after some of the editorial boards of some of the critics are long and truly forgotten. But let me report to you about who else is standing up for working people. And you know who I'm talking about. You heard from her last night. Friends, the Prime Minister of Australia, Julia Gillard, and the Treasurer, Wayne Swan, who will be addressing this conference today, they're standing up for you too, and we should respect and support them. And they're standing up in tough times. You know, there's been something like 470 pieces of legislation passed in this parliament since September 2010. And we've won most of this legislation when it's a vote by 1 or 2 votes. Now, if your favourite football team was winning every game by 1 goal or 2 goals, that would inject a level of stress into the supporters. But when it's 470-0, the scoreboard's on our side. And whilst we may never own all the forms of communication in this country, no one can take away from us our ability to tell the stories and tell the facts. And some of these 470 pieces of legislation, let me briefly remind you what this scoreboard is. Got rid of work choices. It's a reasonably long scoreboard. I don't know if you want to clap after each one of them. But in no particular order of priority, better road safety for the long-distance truck drivers, outworkers getting treated properly, lifting superannuation from 9 to 12%. What a shame that Robert Menzies never did it. The National Disability Insurance Scheme, a steel plan, an aluminium plan, stronger anti-dumping laws, all specifically driven, I have to say, by your leadership. Equal pay for women working in the community services sector. A plan to remove asbestos from buildings in the next 20 years. Oh yes, there's the tax cuts. You're paying if you earn $50,000 a year, you're paying $1,500 less. You're paying thousands of dollars less in tax because of a Labor government. Paid parental leave. The fair entitlements guarantee can't be just taken away by a coalition government if they got elected. These are not too shabby, these changes. When you're at Easter catching up with the in-laws, one of whom may be a rogue or a scallywag and perhaps voting Liberal, give them that list. But there's more to be done. What is wrong with the Fair Work Commission, at last, having the jurisdiction to deal with workplace bullying complaints? We know the state regulators are under-resourced and overworked. It's time we made sure that bullying was a workplace relations issue, which we know it is. We've got to get that through in the next 2 months. And I say to the delegates here from SO, I haven't forgotten the 600 days of arguments where the company tried to change the rosters without regard to the impact. We're putting in a clause. We're putting a clause in the model clauses which says that employers have to genuinely consider the impact of roster changes upon your family life. That'll leaven it up a bit for people. So, friends, that's standing up. When you hear people say, oh, they're not really doing what Labor governments do, tell them to put that list in their pipe and smoke it. But indeed, as you will hear in Warling from our Treasurer today, we hear a lot of doom and gloom about how Australia's going. Not only do they think that unions and Labor don't have a role anymore, but Australia can't compete with the rest of the world. Well, give this list to your family at Easter. Tax to GDP. Our tax take is a smaller portion of GDP than it ever was under Howard. They say they're the low taxing party. They were the big taxing party. That's a fact. Do you know, when Labor came into power, we were the 17th largest economy in the world. We're now the 12th. Unemployment, 5.4%, is difficult, but it compares very well to most of the industrialised world. Interest rates, as they say at Coles, down, down, down. And if you take the size of our economy based on our population, we're 5th in the world. 5th. And the other thing is, when people say that Australia's not going so well, why is it that the rest of the world wants to come and live here? Our population's growing faster than the average of the world. Because the secret's out, friends. This is a great country and people want to be part of it. You look at our superannuation savings. It's larger than our economy. That was something which the Liberals opposed whenever they could get a chance to get out from under the policy doona. The global financial crisis. Our economy's grown 13% since then. Most of the rest of the industrialised world would love that set of numbers. And perhaps most importantly for a union Labor gathering, we have been in charge when there's been 850,000 extra jobs created. That's a test of a Labor government. So there you have it. Both on the industrial front and the economic front, there's a reason for us to hold our head up. And if that wasn't sufficient reason, friends, then let me remind you of what the alternative is. We need to make it clear to the Australian people and to the Australian media that politics should never be a game of the Liberals hide their policies and we seek them. Hide and seek is not acceptable. We should demand, in the voices of which we're able to rally, to say of the opposition, we think workplace relations is important. It is not good enough that the only things they've announced in workplace relations is union baiting and union bigotry. It is not enough for them to smear everyone in the union movement with the actions of a few and say, therefore, all unions are the same. Did you know that since 2003, there's been thousands of prosecutions under the Corporations Law of Companies? Did you know that hundreds of directors and senior managers have been jailed? I never see a speech in Parliament from the Coalition about the evils of business, but dare I ever say that I'm pro-union, they all come out from under their rocks and they want to blame the union movement for everything. We need to fight back. We need to make it clear, as only unions and Labor can, that we stand on the side of not the top 1% of Australian society, but the rest. And it is not good enough for the opposition to think that they can get into power by hiding their policies. That is an insult to Australian people. What I understand, though, is that when you look at Campbell Newman, we see a peek from under the rock of what coalition governments do. They sack, they slash, they burn. Mind you, you've got Premier Baillieu in Victoria. Not going to work up a sweat doing too much. Why should he? He's a Baillieu. But what I do know is that Liberal governments make bad employers. How else can you explain alienating every nurse in Victoria? How is it you can explain triggering the biggest ever government teacher strikes in the history of Victoria? They even got the Catholics out. It's a reverse industrial miracle from, you know... I haven't figured that one out myself. One bullet, two enemies, I don't know. But what I do know is that Premier Baillieu said he'd look after teachers and make them the best paid in Victoria. There was just fine print. He said, I'll make 1 in 10 of you the best paid. It'd almost be funny if it wasn't true. So we know what Liberals do when they get power. They break their word to the workers. Now, there's some tests coming up in the Australian Parliament. Will they support the government's measures for people to be able to request flexible arrangements when they're returning from maternity leave? Will they support us tackling workplace bullying by using the Fair Work Commission? Will they support a simple requirement that there be genuine consultation about roster changes affecting long-standing workers? Will they support reasonable reforms to the right of entry laws? See, if they say that after September 14th, if they're elected, you can trust them, we don't have to take it on faith alone. We don't need to pray to some divine intervention. We can see how they vote before the election. So when people tell you that they've learned their lessons, even though we can't see their policy, when they say that all they're against is bad unions, when they've never said anything about good unions, when they cry their crocodile tears for workers, what will they do on the national wage case this year? Where was their submission on the penalty rates review? Nothing and nowhere. Don't mention the war, don't come near us. Let's hope we can sneak our way into office. But that is why I have confidence in Labor. Because I believe, and I know you believe, that the proposition that standing up for working people is an action which never goes out of fashion. Everything which the people before us have done brings us here to this spot in time. But as I've said, we in this current time are the people who will build our accomplishments for the future. We're an iconic union, from Dame Mary Gilmore to Henry Lawson, just about to every big fight the AW's been somewhere near it or in it. And now it is our turn to step up and stand up. Some people say that, as I said, it's all too hard. The polls are terrible. What can we do? Well, friends, with the strong leadership you have from Prime Minister Gillard, with the strong leadership that this union exhibits, as I said, in many times tough, unglamorous, unreported circumstances, the time has come for us to explain to the Australian people that we stand alongside them, we stand in front of them, we stand for them, because we are the optimistic believers in the future of this country. We know life expectancy is extending. We know that there's more to life than just work. We know we've got to smooth our prosperity, and we know we've got to be healthy. We know we want our kids to be better educated than we were, and we expect them to educate their kids better than we did for them. But I know something else. At 127 years old, we're going to have a lot more birthdays than a lot of our critics. Thank you very much.